consumer acceptance and understanding has been a key issue in all of this. And what we've discovered is that people are very cautious about the electric car.
I would consider it, but I don't know. I haven't done enough research, and I don't know if they're, like, I don't know if they're big enough, if they're going to be strong and big and dependable.
I have to know where I can go to, like, recharge it, or what do I got to do for the battery.
People don't want a mini, tiny car that has 15-inch wheels on there. How is he going to fix that up and go around town and parade it?
While some consumers expressed skepticism about electric cars, California was pressured to drop the mandate. A group called Californians Against Utility Company Abuse fought a small utility surcharge to build charging stations.
And they would go to local city council meetings and say, you don't want to put in an electric vehicle charging station there. That's a waste of taxpayer money. They had this list of supporters, you know, companies like Trader Joe's and others, which you'd say, like, why would they support something like this? So the EV drivers actually got together and started writing letters to some of these people that were listed on their website as being supporters and said, do you realize what you're supporting here? And they got all these names removed from the list.
Further investigation revealed that these groups were consumer organizations in name only, funded almost exclusively by the oil industry. Oil companies also paid for editorials in national publications. They even argued that the environmental benefits of EVs were dubious.
With electric vehicles, we're going to have to shift our energy away from oil. And if we shift it to coal, there are some environmental problems that are just very disconcerting.
Right now in the United States, we're 55% coal. If you run the numbers with standard coal power plants, you don't end up with a better environmental performance, you end up with a longer tailpipe.
Well, there have been numerous studies conducted by the California Energy Commission that clearly show that electric drive is substantially more efficient and substantially less polluting, even if you get your electricity from coal-fired plants.
But the arguments against electrics did not stop there.
They even made the ridiculous argument that there was an environmental justice issue involved because they said only rich people could buy electric cars. Well, the air doesn't know a boundary between Brentwood and South LA.
Car companies began to argue that the mandate was too strict.
We had to help with the regulations. The regulatory people knew nothing about this stuff. And we began to get the eerie feeling that we were going over a cliff. It wasn't going to be possible.
California was faced with the prospect of what do you do if the car companies don't comply? And so rather than, do brinksmanship about what would happen if they didn't comply and stick with it, they started negotiating, certain flexibility in the mandate.
California compromised with the automakers, adopting a memorandum of agreement.
One of the agreements with the state was that the automakers would build and market electric vehicles in accordance with demand.
If they didn't want to build more of them, the car companies would have to make the case that there was no demand.
The person will go unnamed, but we were having a lunch in the executive dining room at the GM Tech Center one day, and just the two of us, and he leans over to me and he says, "Dobbles, you know something? You're my worst enemy." And I said, "Why is that?" And he said, "Well, I'm out there lobbying to show that there's no demand for electric vehicles, and you're out there proving me wrong."
We would sit down with Hal Riney or with executives from GM and make, how far, how fast, how much. These are the three questions we're getting. Please put it in the advertising. It's not rocket science. And they would go back and do the exact opposite.
We never saw a TV ad with an electric car scampering up the side of a hill with a good-looking man or woman draped around it. That's the way they sell cars.
How does it go without gas and air? How does it go without sparks and explosions? How does it go without gears or transmissions? How does it go, you will ask yourself. And then you will ask, how did we go so long without it? The electric car, it isn't coming. It's here.
What was the objective of these advertisements? Was it to entice consumers or to scare them away?
Our goal at GM was to make the full-functioning battery electric vehicle a commercially viable business opportunity for General Motors.
GM spokesman Dave Barthmas has worked for GM for nearly 10 years.
We spent in excess of $1 billion to drive this market, to build the market. That means award-winning advertising, developing the vehicle, developing the recharging infrastructure. And in a 4-year time frame, from roughly 1996 to 2000, we were able to lease 800 EV1s.
So we started this waiting list in order to prove demand to GM, but no matter how many people we got on that list, it was never considered enough demand. Everything was anecdotal to GM.
We have heard about these long waiting lists, and frankly, we did have a list of roughly 4,000 people that raised their hands and said, you know, I would be interested in getting into an EV1 and being an EV1 leasee. We contacted each of those folks, and we whittled that list down. And when we actually got down to a point where we were able to have somebody sign on the dotted line, that list from 4,000 people shrunk to about 50.
Only recently did they finally admit that there actually was a waiting list and tried to explain it away. By the time we explained all the limitations of the car to them, only 50 would sign up. Well, if you sincerely want to market a product, you don't start out by describing the limitations of the product.
Tom Everhart is president emeritus at Caltech. He served on GM's board of directors for 13 years.
I do not think General Motors tried hard to get the electric cars out rapidly. Now, whether the CEO of General Motors understood that, I don't know.
We had to ask permission of whoever we wanted to give a car to, and by the end, when we were low on cars, we had to write case statements. We tried to put the cars in hands of celebrities because they were, number one, the only ones that stood a chance of getting the car. The third grade science teacher didn't stand a chance. I had to write a resume for Mel Gibson and what he'd done and accomplished because the people I was talking to didn't believe that he warranted a car.
I was wondering, why do I have to fill this out, you know? You had to tell them where your birthmarks were, you know? I mean, it was everything, you know? Have you recently had a proctoscope inserted into your, well, no. You know, you had to get really specific about a whole bunch of things.
Consumers wanted it, but they regarded it as a limited vehicle and they expected to pay a limited price for it. And there's nothing irrational about the consumer that said that to us. That's a perfectly reasonable statement. You're giving me a vehicle that does less, I want to pay less. Okay. But unfortunately, I couldn't make it for less.
They argued things like money and they're too expensive to build, and yet they're building 4 a day. I mean, they were very hand-built cars with specialized components, and had they mass marketed them, they of course would have come down.
As car companies made the case there was no demand, electric vehicle advocates thought they had a sympathetic ear with the appointment of environmental scientist Dr. Alan Lloyd as chairman of the California Air Resources Board.
First time I presided over that, I felt that the car companies weren't making a significant effort to do it, so I felt that, well, flog them harder, flog them often. They need to do better.
For the regulation, we felt needed to be changed drastically. And there was some movement that way, but it didn't go away.
While the car companies fought the mandate in Sacramento, GM quietly closed its EV1 assembly line and began laying off its sales force.
All of a sudden, we were not only taken off the project, but taken out of the company. They started with the ones with the biggest waiting list and the most customers, and you know, the primary areas were the ones that they dismantled first. And so at the end of 2001, you know, that was it in terms of my employment with General Motors.
Studying General Motors practices over the years, and I don't speak for the engineers and scientists who would really have liked to have done a better job with motor vehicle technology, but the executives at the top, their motto seemed to have been going backwards into the future. And that's what they've been doing for decades.
As a veteran consumer advocate, Ralph Nader used grassroots campaigns to make cars safer and more fuel efficient. He's familiar with the tactics used by the auto industry to resist change.
There's all kinds of ways that they can bring politicians to their knees. Once the auto companies get a long lead time, then they go to work, eroding, and then when the deadline is approaching, you say, we can't do it, and there are going to be terrible consequences.
Automakers took the fight to a new level. They sued California's Air Resources Board. GM led the lawsuit, soon joined by Chrysler and several auto dealerships. As California withered under the pressure, the car makers found a powerful new ally: the federal government. Shortly after joining the suit, the Bush administration made another announcement.
Tonight, I'm proposing $1.2 billion in research funding so that America can lead the world in developing clean, hydrogen-powered automobiles.
The federal government joined the car and oil industries to embrace a new clean car of the future. With more than $1 billion federal dollars up for grabs, over the next few years, the campaign for hydrogen fuel cell vehicles began to sway California.
Hello there, and welcome to the California Fuel Cell Partnership, where we're fueling the future in a new and environmentally friendly way. Automakers, energy and technology providers, along with government agencies, are voluntarily working together to commercialize the fuel cell for cars and buses. Soon you may see some of these cars cruising through your very own neighborhood.
We will not just dream about the hydrogen fueling stations. We will not just dream about the hydrogen cars. We will build it.
The hydrogen Hummer is not a production vehicle, it's a concept vehicle. It's a way for Governor Schwarzenegger to have a property at various events that he goes to when he unveils a new hydrogen refueling station at LAX, for example.
I'm going to encourage the building of a hydrogen highway to take us to the environmental future.
While hydrogen fuel cells offered an exciting alternative sometime in the future, what would happen to the technology of today? What would happen to the electric car? It all came down to a decisive meeting at California's Air Resources Board. Citizens and industry alike testified as CARB prepared to vote on the fate of the electric car.
I'd also like to thank all the other stakeholders, particularly also the auto industry, who is going to also have a major impact here.
I like the fact that hydrogen might be in a position to displace the petroleum products.
I share your optimism on fuel cells, just not to the extent. I think it's a bait and switch strategy. I hope I'm wrong.
I'm concerned that we've picked numbers that are based entirely on fuel cells. What if fuel cells don't work?
It seems that most of the recent changes to the mandate have been designed to ease the burden on the automakers. You're part of the Environmental Protection Agency, not the Corporate Profit Protection Agency.
I think that we've been a contributor to this marketplace, too.
I agree. But remember, there are many of you, we just had, when I was giving more time to the auto manufacturers.
Lou Browning, I think, had the job to present the EPRI report, and he had been promised 10 minutes.
One of the things
Dr.
we found
Browning,
is...
I would appreciate if you could summarize this in 3 minutes.
Okay, I thought I had 10. But,
Alan Lloyd cut him off, whereas he had given the automakers sort of unlimited time earlier in the day.
And the improvements we need in fuel cells are to get, mainly to get the cost down.
In addition, we've recently certified and introduced the Honda FCX fuel cell vehicle.
Largely, this work is being pushed forward through the California Fuel Cell Partnership, which has been very valuable in pulling together the diverse interests.
Any new information on batteries that sort of didn't mesh with the overall conclusions was really just shut out very fast by Alan Lloyd.
Let's get it clear, I'm not trying to show any bias or anything here.
And there were 80 people who came to speak for electric cars and only 2 industry representatives on the side to kill the mandate.
We have 4 people out of 78 who are supporting this proposal. How did we end up with this?
This is a tough program. It's a revolutionary program. It pushes the automakers hard, and they don't like it, and they push back hard. And as you deliberate today on the fate of this program, I urge you to summon all of your political courage to make the hard choices that you know you need to make on this program. Because when it comes to protecting the health of the people of California, there are simply no more easy choices to make.